Hi, I'm Julie Pettyjohn, and lately I've been doing a lot of free motion quilting videos. I also do ProStitcher computerized quilting, and I realize there are some people out there who might need a little help with that, and this video is for you. This is a basic beginner video. This is going to show you how to set up a basic edge to edge, how to reposition your place after you advance your quilt on your long arm. So I hope there's someone out there who's needing this. This is for you. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe. Thank you. I begin by selecting a design I want to use on my quilt. Now let me show you how I first get this design into my ProStitcher. I go to Design, Open, and click on Open, and then I start looking for the design I know I want. Now sometimes it takes a little hunting. I'll look in one folder or another, and I have my folders divided by designers. In this case, it ends up being in Urban Elements. These were designs that I purchased from Urban Elements, and there it is. So I'm going to select that and open, and that's how I would bring it into ProStitcher Premium. Now you can do this on your computer or you can do it on your tablet, but I always do it on my computer because I don't keep all my designs on my tablet. Next, I'm doing the area. Now I'm going to put in the width of my quilt, and I put in 56, and I clear that because I meant to put in 57. Now for the height, I never put in the full height of the quilt. I usually put in 30 or 35 because I know that's going to get me a really good sampling of my pantograph. I don't need to do the whole entire quilt because I usually end up stitching the same line or two over and over again. Now I look at this design, and you can see at the top it showed me the width and the height of the design, and I'm going to modify, resize, and over at the right I'm going to select lock to lock my aspect ratio, and then I'm going to start making it smaller. And I have an idea about how small I need it to be. If I want to check it, I can use the grid. After resizing, my next consideration is placement. I know I want it to the left horizontally and the top vertically. However, some designs have a lot of space where I'm showing you on the cursor. This is a great design, it really doesn't. But some of them, if you position them up at the top, they may dip down somewhere, and then you're going to have a lot of unquilted space. And in that case, you might need to position it above the area, and then you might have to crop your very first line. In this case, it works out really great for me, and I don't have to do that. I think it'll look good just aligning it at the top and on the left horizontal and vertical top. So I've chosen modify, align, and then lined it to the left and the top. And now I could just do that by moving the design, but this makes it much more accurate. Next, I'm going to repeat the design horizontally. Now I've repeated it until I'm just almost to the right part of the area. So I can click stretch to just stretch that just a little bit further. This was a really easy, good one. Sometimes you have to crop there also. Now I go to vertical. Oh wow, another easy design, because in this case, where I'm running my cursor to show you between the rows, sometimes there's a big gap and we have to go over to this gap box and go in the negative and close up the gap. But in this case, it's perfect as is. So I just make as many vertical repeats as I feel I want to have in my master pantograph. 3 rows is all I ever need. After I'm done, I go over to the left side right above ruler and I'll hit baseline before I save it. Now mine is all grayed out, which means I have baselined this pantograph. So I'm now going to save it on my computer so that I can put it on a flash drive and take it over to my tablet and get ready to quilt. We're in File and Save, and we're going to save the selected. And then I have to decide where I'm going to save it. Now, I want to save it in my flash drive, which that is what F is, and I have a working folder. So I also have some folders with some customers' names, but just a working folder. And then I'm going to clear what name it gives me, and I'm going to come up with something that means something to me. And I'm going to call this one Star Swirl. Sometimes I call them Star Swirl Panto or Star Swirl Master. Master means what I have before I have to do any cropping or anything. So now I'm ready to take this over to my tablet. You're ready for part 2. I'm going to assume that you already know how to load your quilt. If you're not sure, then there are a lot of great videos out there, and there are a few different ways to load them too. So let's say you've loaded your quilt. So here I'm just showing you how I based. Now this is 3 times the actual speed on my video, so don't think my machine goes this fast. But I go to Quilt and then select my baste, and I have my baste to go to 1/4 inch. I'm doing 1/4 inch across the top, then I go down as far as I can on the right, and then I go down as far as I can on the left. If you're curious, I use the clear view method to load my quilts, and I also use a red snapper system. Mine are purple though, but that's the system I like to use. Now I need to set an area for this quilt. It's not always the same as the area we put on the computer. So I'm going to go to area, and I can choose, do I want 2 points or do I want multi-point? And I like to use the multi-point, and I have shortcuts on my handlebars. So the star is for 2-corner, the diamond is for multi-point. So when I run along, take my machine along, and every time I click that it makes a point, and then those points go together, and I now have my area box. Now what I'm doing here is just changing the height, because I know that I need 30 to 35 inch height for what I made on my computer. Then I go to retrieve my design that I saved on my flash drive, and I find that design. Remember, we saved it with 3 rows, and I'm going to find that, and then I'm going to push open, and that will bring that in on my tablet. The design comes in, and just like on the computer, I have to position this in my area box. So I'm going to modify and reposition, and then I think, wait a minute, that's not the way I want to do that. I'm just going to go to Align, Modify Align, and then I go to the left horizontally and the top vertically, and I have it lined up. Now look, this design runs a little bit outside of my area box, but that's okay because I like to stitch out into the batting anyway, so that's going to work great. I want to double check that this stitch design is the right size for the density I want on my quilt. So I'm going to ProStitcher, and I have Quilt selected, but I'm going to select Stitch over on the right side, and that takes away all my settings for actually stitching down thread. Then I push to proceed, and it's as if I'm stitching, but I'm not putting any thread down. So this is an air stitch. In this way, I can look at my machine And sorry about that, right in front of where the needle is the mechanism I use to hold my camera when I'm videoing right down on the needle for you. So that's kind of in the way, but you can see that, and I look at the tablet, I look back down at the quilt, look at the tablet, and I get an idea where everything's going to fall. And that tells me that, hey, that looks good to me. I do want that. So now that I've tested that out, I'm ready to get going. I'm going to teach you 2 ways to advance your quilt and position your design for future rows of quilting. One is where you mark the starting point with a pin. The other one is drag and drop. It's important to remember that the first one you do before you ever turn your wheel and advance your quilt. Drag and drop you can do after. So even if you like the first one, you have to know drag and drop. It's imperative that you know that, because there are going to be times that you will forget to set your starting point before you advance your quilt. Here I have stitched my first row. I get my long jump pause notification. I cut my threads, and I'm going to use method number 1. I want to put a pin in where I'm going to start my next row before I advance the quilt. The way I determine that is I move my long arm over to the left side of my quilt, and I hit resume as if I'm going to do a second row of stitching. The needle goes down and up and puts some thread there, and rather than letting it go ahead and proceed, I do not choose proceed, I choose cancel. And I place my pin right where the thread is in the quilt. And then I advance my quilt, and I now move my long arm over where the pin goes in, not where it comes out, right where it goes in. And I can see my little red laser light there, and that is where I set the laser light, is where the pin went into the quilt. And I choose reposition at start point. So you'll go modify, reposition, and then over at the right is start point. I'll show you here on the screen on your tablet. You will choose, you want that green big start point to be where your crosshairs are. So I'm going to modify, and I already have reposition selected right there. Then over on the right side of the tablet, I will find start point, because the large green dot is my start point. And now you see it put that right up at the crosshairs, right where my long arm is sitting, where my needle is. That's how I get it ready to stitch. Now you might say, well, hey, you're putting row 1 there. Well, remember before I said to you, I can stitch one row over and over and over. If all my rows are the same, I just repeatedly stitch that row. If you wanted to do your second row, you could do ProStitcher new start and make your start point on the next green dot. But I like to just stitch the same row over and over. So you'll notice then I hit run, and look, I have stitched my second row now in perfect position. So this is how you cut the threads. You'll have to put your needle over where it ended, go needle down, needle up, hold on to all 3 threads and cut them. That cuts your bobbin and your top threads. That's the way you do method number 1. Now that is all determined by you not advancing your quilt first, because if you've advanced the quilt first, see, like I'm doing right here and advancing, then you're going to have to use the drag and drop method, and it's really, really simple. I'm going to show you the way I do it. I don't put my needle down into the quilt and let it move while I turn. I simply advance the quilt. Now I want to make sure I've got enough throat space that I'm not going to hit the bar up at the top. So I always move my needle up in here and just say, hey, am I going to be able to get up in here? All right, so this is for method number 2. You're going to want to take your computer picture and drag it and drop that design onto the exact spot where you want it on the quilt. That's why it's called drag and drop. You're going to drag the design to the place you want it on the quilt and drop it. So you can pick any spot. It's up to you. It's not determined by anyone else. So I'll look at it and I'll say, well, okay, maybe I want to go the 4th star over, the 5th star over. I want to make sure it's a place where I can get my needle. So I go to my computer first, not the quilt, computer first. And so I'm going to determine where that place is. Now notice here though, I had put a new start point way over here where I must have broke thread or run out of a bobbin. So I have to go to ProStitcher, new start and end, and then I'm going to push my arrow. Let's see here. There we go. Okay, the top arrows just make it go little bit by little bit. The bottom arrows will make it jump. All right. So I click that, but this time it's very important on drag and drop. I want to click up the next row. I don't want to go backwards. I want to go to the 2nd row. The reason, I'm going to use that 1st row that I'm showing you with my finger there to mark my spot. If I'm marking my spot on the place where I stitch, that doesn't work. I have to mark my spot on a previous row. That's why I like to have 2 to 3 rows. I need a before row to get my placement so my next row can stitch perfectly. Okay, I'm looking over here to find 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to use the 5th star just because. Now I'm putting zoom because I need to go in close because it can look like I'm right on a spot and I'm not. And I've decided I'm going to use this bottom right point of the star to line up. So I want to get my crosshairs, which is where a needle would be. I'm getting my crosshairs right there, and I'm going to select drag over at the left. Okay, I'm videoing this in my hands, which is a little awkward for me here, but you can see. Now once I select drag, it toggles to drop. So drag and drop are the same key. For that, I go to my quilt. So I match computer to quilt. I go to my quilt and I count 5 stars over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm a little disappointed that I picked a star that's on some of the busiest fabric, so it's a little bit harder to see. But I can see it better probably than you can, and I can find it, and I found that point. So now I want to use my laser pointer and get that right on top of that point, just like I did when I was matching up the computer spot. Now I'm going to go up and select drop. That takes that design and drops the spot I marked before exactly to the spot on the quilt. Now the design matches up perfectly. Everything on row 1 is matched up to the row that's already been stitched. That's why I want to stitch row 2. So if I do drag and drop every single time, I can always use row 1 to line up my previous row and row 2 to stitch. Then I like to have row 3 in there in case when I get down to the bottom of a quilt, I need to crop. And I don't have enough room to do a full row, and I need to do some cropping. So I like to have 1 row for repositioning, 1 row to stitch, and then 1 row for doing a last border and getting it positioned just right. And I'm going to show you that too here in a minute. So this is 3 times the actual speed, stitching this out, and as you can see it goes up to the previous row, but it doesn't cross over it, leaves just a little bit of space, so everything is perfectly aligned. I think that some people have gotten a little worried about drag and drop because they were taught to put the needle in the quilt. This way is much easier. So now here we go. I'm all the way done, fast forward, and I'm down to my bottom row. And I don't have quite enough space to do a whole row. If I did a whole row, it would go way down. But what I've done is I've marked with my pen where that row says it should start if I was going to do the whole row, right? So I'm going to go up to my screen and I'm going to make sure that I have repositioned on the starting point. And then I'm not sure if on here I used the third. Yes, I did. Okay. So, oops, I did something there. So you can always do undo. I push my undo, and then home. I push home to get back to home. Okay, so I want a new start and end because I want to use that 3rd row, as I said, to do my bottommost row. So I'm going to jump my starting point all the way down to the 3rd row. It's now in the 2nd row. I want to jump it down to that next green dot. Okay, jump, and there it is. Okay, so I've got my starting point on row 3, my stopping point on row 3. So now I'm going to modify, crop, and then I'm going to crop between the start and end points. That leaves me that 3rd row. So I'm positioned just right where the pin is. I have that all set to stitch exactly where it's supposed to. I just have a little more stitching there than I need. So I'm going to clear the area box I have and create a new one to help me crop to just the perfect size that I need. So this is a little awkward doing the camera up, down, but what I'm doing is I'm going to hit area and clear the previous area. Then I'm going to use my multi-point, that diamond right there on my right handlebar, and I'm selecting it, and it goes ding and puts a little point, and then I'm running across and ding. Now I want to do this above the design. That's important because I don't want to cut anything off at the top. And I'm going all the way across the quilt, and I've got my top part of the area. Now I move down to where I want the design to cut off. And I want it to cut off where I've basted my quilt at the bottom. So I'm going to put it there, and I'm going to click my diamond shape again. I could click the tablet if I want, but it's so much easier to click the handlebars if you do have shortcut handlebars. And see, every time I stop, I'm clicking that diamond, and I'm hearing a little ding, ding to tell me I've got dots. And what that does is it makes a straight line in between every marking point I make. So I get over here, and look, you can see where my area is. That's all the design I really need. I don't need the whole row. So I'm now going to crop this, modify crop, but I want to close the edges. And closing the edges means I won't have a whole bunch of threads and a bunch of starts and stops. And I want to crop out everything that's outside of that area box. And there it goes. Now I'm needing to baseline that, and I like to always save that. Probably I'm not going to need the saved bit, but I have lost power before, right in the middle of my last row. And if I have it saved, then it's all done and I don't have to go back and reposition and resave everything. So I'm going to save this with some other name, and then I can just delete it. Now, the reason I'm hitting cancel there is because it's wanting to use the same name and I wanted to use a different name. Okay, so I'm saving the selected. I'm going to have to give it some different name. See, it was wanting to replace my master. And I'm like, no, I'm going to call it Star Swirl Last for the last row. And I misspelled it, which doesn't really matter as long as I can find it later. But there we go, Star Swirl Last. I've got it saved in case anything would happen and I would need that little bit again, cropped just perfect. And remember, if I had not closed the edges, you would see a whole bunch of green dots down at the bottom, little restarts, and it would stitch so far and tell me I needed to do a jump, a pause and a jump, and I would have all these loose threads. So I want to close it because it's perfectly fine down at the very bottom to have those straight cropped lines. That also, when I crops, gives me a brand new starting point. It's no longer over where that pin was. So now, see how it's doing a straight line, a straight cropped line at the bottom? Perfect, just perfect. That's how you do the bottom of your quilt. Those are the basics you will need for edge-to-edge quilting. I suggest that you continue doing edge-to-edge till you feel really comfortable with it before you take on custom quilting. It takes a little while just to get used to it, but then it becomes a breeze. I hope you've enjoyed this and you've learned something from it. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. My name's Julie. Thank you.